Somewhere right now, there is a person who has spent years, real years, studying English grammar with almost military discipline. Every tense memorized, every preposition rule filed away in perfect order. Written exams scored near perfect. By every measure the education system uses, this person is ready. And then that same person sits down to watch an American film, or listens to two strangers chatting in a London coffee shop, or drops into a casual conversation with native speakers for the very first time. And what they hear doesn't match anything they studied. Words vanish out of sentences that should need them. Prepositions land in places the textbook swore they never could. Pronouns get used in ways that would have cost them marks on any exam. And a very specific, very frustrating thought arrives. If native speakers don't even follow their own rules, then what exactly did I spend all those years learning? Who's actually wrong here? The rulebook, or the people the rulebook was supposedly describing. This is one of the strangest, most disorienting moments in learning any language, and almost everyone who studies English seriously eventually runs straight into it. Call it the rigid grammar trap. It's the assumption, quietly built into most classrooms, that grammar functions like mathematics, a fixed set of laws, unbreakable, with a single correct answer for every sentence. But language was never actually built like mathematics. It was built by millions of people, across generations, trying to connect with each other as quickly and naturally as possible. And when speed and connection compete against textbook precision in everyday conversation, precision, more often than not, quietly loses. So here's the uncomfortable truth worth sitting with. If you walk into a casual conversation using flawless, rigid, textbook grammar, you will not sound impressively educated. You will sound strange, stiff, slightly robotic. Like someone reading from a manual instead of actually talking to another human being. Today we're going to look closely at exactly which rules native speakers break, constantly, without a second thought, why breaking those particular rules doesn't damage communication at all, and, just as importantly, exactly where that freedom ends, because it absolutely does end somewhere, and knowing that boundary is the difference between sounding natural and sounding careless. Let's start with the rules that disappear first, the moment any conversation turns casual. The first one is a kind of quiet erasure. In the textbook version of English, every complete sentence needs a clear subject and a clear verb. Are you going to the store? Have you finished your work? Grammatically whole, technically correct, and almost nobody actually talks that way once they're relaxed and among people they know. What happens instead is a kind of efficient shorthand. Are you ready becomes simply ready, delivered as a single word with a raised eyebrow. Have you got a minute becomes got a minute, tossed casually across an office. The textbook calls this incomplete. Real speakers call it Tuesday. And it works perfectly well, because the missing words are never actually missing information. The context around the conversation fills them in instantly, without any real effort from either speaker. The second broken rule involves a battle that was, in a sense, already lost decades ago, even if some grammar books still haven't noticed. Somewhere along the way, a rule took hold insisting that a sentence should never end with a preposition, words like with, to, or at. According to that rule, correct English demanded something like, with whom are you going, or to what place are you traveling? Sentences that, if you actually said them out loud to a colleague over lunch, would earn you a very confused look, and possibly a joke about time travel. In real, modern, spoken English, prepositions land at the end of the sentence constantly and comfortably. Who are you going with? What are you looking at? That is not degraded English. That is simply how the language moves, and has moved, in ordinary speech for a very long time. The third one tends to bother traditional grammar teachers more than almost any other, and yet it survives everywhere, in every English-speaking country, across every social class. Strict grammar insists that if you and another person share an action, correctness demands you place yourself second, and use the subject pronoun. My friend and I went to the cinema, and yet walk into nearly any school hallway, office break room, or family dinner, and you will hear, constantly, me and my friend went to the cinema. Technically, by the rulebook, incorrect, practically. So deeply embedded in casual native speech that your ear simply needs to learn to accept it without flinching, because flinching every time you hear it will only slow you down in real conversations. Now, here's the question this naturally raises, and it's an important one, because it would be easy to draw exactly the wrong conclusion from everything just described. Does this mean you should throw away everything you've learned about grammar and start speaking carelessly on purpose, hoping it sounds more natural? Absolutely not. And understanding why requires understanding one concept that changes everything about how you use this information. Context. Think of English grammar less like a fixed law and more like clothing. Nobody wears a formal suit to the beach. Nobody shows up to a job interview in swim trunks. You choose your outfit based on where you're going and who you're meeting, instinctively, without needing to think too hard about it. Grammar works exactly the same way. It exists along a spectrum, running from deeply informal on one end to fully formal on the other, and your job as a speaker is to recognize which end of that spectrum you're currently standing on. At the informal end, among friends, family, casual coworkers, texting, relaxed lunch conversations, the actual goal of language shifts away from precision and towards something else entirely: connection, speed, ease. In this zone, breaking the so-called rules isn't sloppy, it's functional. It's even, in a strange way, a form of intimacy. If you respond to a friend's casual question with perfectly formal textbook grammar, something like, "I do not know what you are talking about," rather than the far more natural, "No clue what you're on about," you don't come across as polished. You come across as distant, almost cold, as though you're keeping the other person at arm's length instead of relaxing into the conversation with them. In this zone, shortened, casual, rule-breaking speech is the sound of comfort. But slide to the other end of that spectrum, and everything changes. In the formal zone, job interviews, presentations to clients, emails to senior executives, academic writing, formal exams, the underlying goal of your language is no longer speed or intimacy. It's credibility, authority, precision as a signal of competence. And here, the same shortcuts that build warmth in casual conversation start to cost you something real. Say to a client, in a formal meeting, "Me and my friend managed the project." And even if every word of the sentence is perfectly understandable, something quietly shifts in how that listener assesses you. Not because the sentence confused them. Because, fairly or not, adherence to formal grammar in formal settings functions as a signal, a shorthand for attention to detail, for respect toward the environment you're standing in, for the kind of intellectual rigor people unconsciously expect in high-stakes professional spaces. So the real skill isn't choosing between correct and incorrect grammar. It's learning to read the room and adjusting the dial accordingly, the same way a fluent native speaker does automatically, without ever consciously thinking about it. Which risks us to the question that actually matters most in all of this. If some rules can be broken, how do you know, in any given moment, which ones are safe to bend, and which ones absolutely are not? Here is the boundary, and it's simpler than it might sound. You can break a grammar rule freely, as long as breaking it doesn't damage clarity. The moment a broken rule starts changing what a listener actually understands, rather than simply how casual or formal it sounds, you've crossed out of natural, native-style speech and into genuine error, the kind that causes real confusion rather than simply signaling closeness or formality. Let's look at two places where this line is absolute, non-negotiable, even in the most relaxed, casual setting imaginable. The first is verb tense. Specifically, anywhere a tense shift changes the actual timeline of events. Say, "I lived in New York for 2 years," and you're communicating something specific. That chapter is closed. You live somewhere else now. Say instead, "I have been living in New York for 2 years," and the meaning shifts entirely. You are still there, right now, as you speak. These two sentences aren't stylistic variations of each other. They describe two different realities, and no native speaker, no matter how relaxed the conversation, casually swaps one for the other, because doing so wouldn't sound natural. It would simply misinform whoever's listening. The second is the line between singular and plural, particularly in professional or instructional contexts, where the stakes of miscommunication are higher than they first appear. Tell your team, "We need to change this system," and they will picture one specific, contained problem. Tell them instead, "We need to change these systems," and suddenly they're bracing for a massive, sprawling overhaul, entirely different in scope and workload. A single letter, dropped or added carelessly, can alter what an entire team spends the next several weeks working on. This is not a place for casual shortcuts. This is where accuracy, quiet and unglamorous as it seems, genuinely protects people's time and effort. So how do you actually learn to walk this line, confidently, without constantly second-guessing yourself in real conversations? The most reliable method isn't inventing your own shortcuts and hoping they land naturally. It's something closer to careful, patient observation. Watch your favorite shows. Listen closely to podcasts hosted by native speakers. Notice specifically which shortcuts repeat again and again across different speakers and different contexts. Those repeated patterns are not accidents. They are the actual, living grammar of casual spoken English, tested and reused by millions of speakers over years. Borrow those specific patterns deliberately. And while you borrow them, keep a firm, careful grip on the two places where clarity cannot bend: your tenses and your plurals. Because those aren't style choices. Those are the load-bearing walls of meaning itself. Do this consistently, and something genuinely interesting starts to happen in how you speak. You stop sounding like someone reciting a rulebook, and you stop sounding careless or confused. You land somewhere far more valuable and far harder to fake. You start sounding like someone who understands the language deeply enough to know exactly which rules exist to be bent, and exactly which ones exist to protect meaning. And you move fluidly between the two without even having to think about it anymore. Because that, in the end, is what grammar was always meant to be. Not a cage, built to trap your voice and make you second-guess every sentence before you say it out loud. A framework. Nothing more, nothing less. Native speakers break its more decorative rules constantly, not out of ignorance, but because they understand that framework so completely, so instinctively, that bending it has become second nature, a tool for speaking faster, connecting closer, and sounding above all human. So the next time you sit down with a movie or a podcast, or two strangers talking in a coffee shop nearby, don't just listen for meaning anymore. Listen for the specific moments a word disappears from a sentence that would technically need it. Listen for where a preposition lands, unexpectedly, right at the very end. Notice it. Hold on to it. That small, ordinary moment of imperfection is not a flaw in the language. It's the sound of English actually being lived in.